Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly, and voila! You get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. With me today, I have a very interesting guest, and we're going to have some fascinating discussions today. Probably the most technical conversation I've ever had on the HR Data Labs podcast. I'd like to welcome my friend, Christopher Kunze. Hello, Christopher.
David, great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Chris, why don't you give us some of your background? Because you have a great background, started out in Europe. Give us a little bit of background.
Sure. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I studied at Marquette University. And after college, I ended up joining an organization and spending 14 years in Europe. 6 of those years were in Germany, 6 in Italy, and 2 of them in Salamanca, Spain. So it was very interesting. My father came from Germany when he was 19 years old. And so we have family over there. And my wife also, both her parents came from Germany. So that was, the place to go and to meet relatives. But I got a chance to work there and, I studied philosophy in Rome, Italy, and also a little bit of psychology and some, different topics there. I studied there for several years. And then I worked for 3 years full-time in the Vatican.
No way. Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah,
I think a lot of us aspire to do something like that.
Yeah, it was really something. I was working for a Colombian cardinal, and I was processing information coming in from German-speaking countries. So I was an analyst.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. But there's something even more fascinating. A fun thing that not many people know about you is you've done cliff diving near Sorrento. How was that?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. If you go to the island of Capri and you look towards the inland, you see this beautiful little bay, and it's very hard to get to. There's several thousand steps to go down, and there we'd swim offshore and get to this island. And I had a crazy buddy from the Detroit area, and he and I would do cliff diving there. Their boats would come. When they saw we were doing it, it was half nuts. I was in my early 30s. Yeah. So the boats would come around and make a semicircle, and they'd watch us cliff dive. But you had to jump out. If you didn't jump out enough, you'd splat on the rocks below. So, yeah.
And then we wouldn't be talking right now.
We would not be talking right now. That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Chris, today's topic is going to be, as I said before, one of the most technical we've ever talked about on HR Data Labs. We're going to be talking about the Predictive Model Markup Language, PMML. And some of us who've done statistical programming like R or SPSS or SAS, we may have heard of it and potentially even used it. But for those people who haven't, can you give us like a 20-second primer, 30-second primer on what is PMML?
Hey everybody, Tim Sackett, host of HR Famous, a new podcast on the Work Defined Network. Am I famous? No, I'm HR famous. My wife says I'm a micro celebrity and 13 HR ladies around the world want their picture with me, which I think is funny. So, hey, what do we talk about on the pod? We talk about all the dumb stuff we do in HR in any given day, week, month, and we have fun with it, and we have some great guests. Come check us out. We're not famous. We're HR famous.
Sure. Everyone has a website, right? They've seen HTML and the code that runs everything. Sure. Well, that's a special language, and a very common language is called XML, and a lot of different technologies written. This is a form of that language, and what it is, it's a standardized way that different analytical programs, some that are free that people use and others that are paid for can talk. I do some work in one program, and now I decide I'd like to deploy that work in another. This language will make that possible.
Oh, cool. So it's a way of coding for the statistical language.
Yes, the analytical programs, when you begin crunching numbers and trying to figure out what's going on, it will document what you've done in predictive model markup language. Not that you have to know how to code, but that's just the common denominator. You can then export it and import it into another program so that you can continue working and even deploying your models through more advanced technology.
Awesome. So let's get to our first question, Chris. Why is PMML useful?
Sure. Well, it's an attempt by a lot of analytical companies to have a common language. So it's to counter the whole Babel type of thing. You know, when you have companies, they've got proprietary information, their coders like to code in the particular language, but then it can't talk with anything else. So this is a way that also the industry can standardize concepts and provide some transparency so that when people do work, other scientists, data scientists or statisticians or programmers can come in and check the work and say, oh yeah, I understand what's going on now. And I can follow the logic and the documentation. And so this is going to be really useful, especially for the human, as we say, for different industries, for the human resource whole area.
World. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I actually worked with the HR Open world, the HR Open group, which was the group that was charged with being able to help the transactions of XML between different parties. So whether it was open enrollment for benefits, whether it was the group that I worked on, which was the compensation survey group, where we were transmitting data back and forth between survey vendors and their clients. It's a way of being able to document in plain English, by the way, because XML is plain English, a codified way of being able to read, in this case, the predictive language or the predictive model, a common way for us to read it and be able to understand the components of it, right?
Absolutely. And if anyone has ever tinkered in Excel and they've recorded a macro and then they open up and they see what that looks like, right? So it's interesting. You can have different levels of proficiency, but that allows you then to rerun that line of code or that program and automate what you're trying to do.
Great.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by Turetsky Consulting and listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So, Chris, if we talk about an example of how we might use PMML, let's talk about your work in pre-hire assessments and how you might do pre-hire modeling or modeling what the best candidate might be using PMML for pre-hire assessments.
David, yes, PMML is really useful because if I am in an IBM product, SPSS, the statistical package for the social sciences, and I'm building a model with assessment data, psychometric test data. Typically, this is used for hiring and promoting of employees. I build a model. Now, I'd like to deploy my models in a format that my customers find useful. And I will deploy it in, let's say, we've got ClickSense Cloud Analytic data, right? I can upload it there. And now they've got that package, and there are over, I think, 40,000 users worldwide using that analytical package. I'm now starting to use it with Power BI, so I could build my model in SPSS, or in what I really like now is a wonderful program called Frontline Solvers. That interfaces really well with Excel. They are the producers of the solver software in the Excel package. When you go to the data tab and so forth, they have,
I've seen that.
So I love to build models directly in Frontline Solvers in Excel, and then to deploy it in Power BI, and now I'm getting some other software called Trend Data, which is HR analytics software. They're a company in Texas. So there are just a myriad of ways to deploy. You're not basically chained, right, to a single technology. Now you can be creative, and even I can deploy on the web with some type of software. Zementis makes a web portal, and they can deploy also these models. So it's about being creative, thinking about the end customer, what their preferences are, how they'd like to consume the data modeling that we do.
Yeah, because with PMML, now the world is open to them to be able to consume that model however they'd like.
That's right. Absolutely.
So let's go back to that example we were talking about pre-hire assessments. And let's talk about then how would you build models, or how do you use models to be able to help with doing pre-hire assessments?
So modeling is something that has been done by the test publishing companies. The industry is about 100 years old, and they've created software where they will look at assessment results. They'll be measuring cognitive abilities, personality traits, occupational interests, different types of hard and soft skills, emotional intelligence. So there'll be a battery of different types of dimensions. And then these publishing companies have their own algorithms to leverage what a top performer profile would look like. And then they'll score new data so you get an overall job match or a fit score. Now, where analytics really comes in is to validate the usefulness of the assessment and to put under a microscope those models and say, are they doing what they're supposed to do? Do they really predict the desired business outcome? And that's how I got into the whole industry. Once you're looking at that and you're using the technology from the publishers, that's great to a certain extent. It might explain 20, 25, 30% of variability in the metric. And it's useful. But now we have advanced people analytics and data mining models that can triple and quadruple the accuracy. So when I have a data set from a client, let's say a sales team, I did this working with a publishing company, one of my favorite publishing companies down in Texas. It's called Telexis Talent Solutions. I know the chief executive officer, Joe Kistner, for many years, almost 2 decades. We used his assessments. He's about 45 minutes online, 200 some questions with 80 top-level sales executives from Singapore to Sweden in 9 time zones, several languages. They take this little assessment online, cognitive personality traits, and then we build a model with his software, apply it, and then I get a chance to analyze it. Well, now we can build the more advanced models that instead of explaining 30% of variability, will explain over 90%.
Which is amazing. Just amazing. Yeah.
And that's the best place to start, in my opinion, for any type of coaching plan, to really make the relationship between the manager and the direct report more robust, realistic. And then because we're using a type of data that's reliable, it's much more reliable than a lot of demographic data that you could use or anything that you could scrape from media and so forth. It's reliable data because it's been designed to be used for serious decisions. And it's, these instruments are compliant with the U.S. Department of Labor, EEOC, and all of that. So what I like to do is that it's reliable, meaning that if I take an assessment today and I take it again in 3 months, there'll be a correlation between those two responses, at least 0.7. And so,
I think where a lot of companies are looking at this, and a lot have used it, is, as you mentioned, in those kind of groups that are driving things like sales, where you're trying to mirror or mimic the behaviors and the traits and the characteristics of those people who've been extremely successful. And you're trying to repeat that again and again and again. And what you do is you have them take these assessments, which are trying to not necessarily filter, but they're trying to find those things that make that person successful and then be able to keep replicating, correct?
That's right. And so when you build a model that's used to make personnel decisions, then you say, well, on the test scores that we're getting, the assessment scores, what does 1% difference in that test score mean in our metrics of interest? So you can actually start to now quantify and say, well, candidate A, B, and candidate A, there's a huge difference in the forecast productivity based upon what we know from the
with
assessment.
Actual productivity.
Yes.
Right.
And it's again, it's translating from data that people really don't want to hear about. The psychometric data is only an instrument. It's not an end in itself.
Right.
It's all about the metrics of interest that are used to make decisions.
No, but it comes back to what you were mentioning before, which is the validation. Being able to use people analytics as a validation for the behaviors that, or the actions and the decisions that we have made in the past. Using people analytics in that way really drives the business, not just reactive and knee-jerk and looking at past things that have happened and saying retroactively, hey, our headcount changed from this and this, and therefore. No, when people analytics is used in this way, where you're actually looking at business results, you're validating why they happened, you're contributing to the business actually performing to where it should be.
That's right. And you're discovering latent or hidden traits that are not readily observable. You don't know them until you measure them in a normed way, in a serious way, where the respondent doesn't know what these answers are going to load with.
And actually, one of my colleagues wrote, what gets measured gets managed. If you don't know what your measurements are, you're not going to know where you stand or how you can make and track improvements. So it's really powerful that you're not only measuring, but you're following up and you're making sure that you're managing to those measurements.
That's right. And then once you've got the measurements and you have the method for crunching the numbers and making sense, then you're able to make hypotheses. So I'll give a real good example. The late Jack Welch, when he was running General Electric, he would have all of his top managers do pilot studies. If they ever wanted to change something in one of their divisions where they had profit and loss responsibility, they would have to do a little pilot. And when they did that pilot, they would get a correlation coefficient. They would get an estimate of the value of the change, and then also what it would mean cutoff scores for what's good and acceptable and what's not. With those three variables, they would be able to forecast the value ahead of making the change, and they would have really ammunition for a great argument to come back to Jack and say, hey, this would increase the value of our department by so many $1 million. This pilot shows us we have all of the, and it's a formula that comes from started way back in the 1930s and 40s, the Brogden-Cronbach laser utility formula. It's marvelous. I've been using it for over 12 years to forecast the value of my modeling before implementation.
You know what you reminded me of there? When you were talking about how somebody would do it, they'd measure it, and they'd see if it produced the appropriate result. It reminds me a lot of in the world of programming and in the world of development, where you put something in a user acceptance test state before you actually move it to production. And you kind of live in a kind of parallel world where you have production going and you have this other world going. And then you're looking at the two of them, you're measuring what the difference is between the two. And then you're accepting that what you did in UAT is what you want in production. And so for those people who've done software development, it's kind of like just like that. You're measuring, is the change I've made effective? Is it going to solve the problem I'm hoping it to solve? And then should I actually then put it into production? So it's a great example. I know you're going to laugh about this, Chris. I often use the term that people analytics is an art, not a science. In this case, it can be both. But you have to then be able to take the measurements away and be able to, as a good scientist, judge whether or not this change actually will do what I think it will do, using, from a people perspective, using the fact that sometimes the results that we see may not necessarily play out in real life.
That's so true. I once had a client that used an assessment for an entire year without making a single decision based upon the results.
Wow.
They assessed 4,000 candidates, many of whom were then hired, and it was a company that they manufacture railroads, locomotives, and cars, and then they also operate them in Canada and the U.S.
Sure.
So they had a position. So we built a model. Then after a year with 4,000 data points, they used it for a year, and then we came back and studied the results, built a new model, and that year they said, well, we want to increase performance. We increased performance after the next year. Then they said, now we'd like to increase safety. Okay, now you're going to build a completely different model.
Right.
Because whenever they would have injuries or accidents, they'd be, millions of dollars. So we found one of the dimensions on the assessment that if you scored on the low side, you were 4 times more likely to get injured.
Wow. That's incredible. That is incredible. And hopefully it proved out. And I love the fact that they were patient enough to collect the data points.
Yes.
And then review it and be able to make good business decisions based on it. A lot of companies just don't have that patience. They just, because things are right now, it has to happen right now, they lose that patience, and then you lose the ability to be scientific.
Yes. Now, most companies, they're going to want something right away. So the way we do it is we'll say, we're not just going to assess your top performers. We'd like to assess everyone in the role, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Right.
Because we don't want to have what's called range restriction. We want to see the entire data set. And when we do that, the model becomes so much more accurate. And it also allows us then to coach. I just did a project with a number of students at the Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston. There were 32 students taking a course on management and leadership. So I administered this 45-minute assessment from Telexis Talent Solutions. Then the professor, whom I've known for about 20 years, he gave me their academic performance, the point system that he uses. And it was near the end of the semester. So we had really good data. And I built a model, a success pattern, and we could predict their grade. So there were 9 different grade codes from A all the way down to a failing score, 9 different codes. We could, just with that assessment, we could predict within 2 codes, right? That was the error, plus or minus 2 codes. But then I built a data mining model using much more advanced regression trees and a type of sampling method that makes 10 models instead of 1, a boosting model that looks at the whole data set and solves the most complex and difficult observations first. So it was advanced statistical modeling. And then the software predicted the grade code for each of the 32 students with 100% accuracy.
That's incredible. Hopefully you didn't give that out to anybody, any of the teachers there, because then all they would have had to do is give the assessment and you were done. Give the assessment and then you're done.
Well, the interesting thing, we had 3 stragglers that completed the assessment after the case study was done. And when we forecast for them and their data wasn't in the set, that did the training of the model, we got 2 of them right and 1 off by 1 code.
Wow.
So,
That's great. That's called validation. Actually, we love to do that in the predictive modeling world. We like to be able to have a training set and then use part of the data to be able to test the set. So that was a great test set right there.
Yeah, you normally, when you have a larger set, you have training, validation, and then a test set. So you can actually partition into 3 different data sets if the data set is large enough.
So let's go to the last question, Chris, which I think is kind of brings it all home for a lot of the people who are going to be listening to this, which is around coaching. And how do you be able to take insights that you've developed with using people analytics? How do you do that to drive differences in how people behave, and into also how do you make them, or how do you give them information and coach them with the information to make better business decisions?
Yeah, this is really marvelous, and it's what I learned intuitively over 25 years ago when I was in Germany in a learning center. I would meet with the students twice a month for a one-on-one for about a half hour. And during the first year of their training, I would try to figure out what their personality type was so that by modifying my communication style,
Right.
everything would be so much easier. Now, in the psychometric world, when we assess candidates for a job or incumbents in a role, now you leverage that data, which is quite reliable, in a way to coach them. So
Right.
with the advanced data mining, now the sales team very well. You understand which features that the assessment understands well and measures, which of those are predictive of metric A, metric B, metric C. And now you can go back and put back in the data from a single incumbent and start doing what they call ad hoc manipulation. I can add a unit, I can subtract one, and I can see what happens to the metric. Does it go up? Does it go down? And now we have three things that happen. This is a great strategy. So now I can really figure out statistically what are this salesperson's greatest strengths. So if this person is in a work atmosphere that's very stressful or there's conflict, that strength is important because we say don't change your behavior related to how extroverted you are or your level of optimism or your take charge. And then they know, and it's really important for them to know and the manager that these are the strengths that are unique to this person. Now, when we do the ad hoc, then we might find out, hey, if you slightly decrease a trait, let's say it's your energy level, right? Maybe you're doing things too quickly. Just slow down a little bit. That will increase metric B by 25%. Or it will increase your gross revenue or your quota attainment by 15%. So we're now starting to say, well, these are your strengths and these are opportunities for improvement with slight modifications that we know are realistic.
You know, when you're talking, one of the things that comes to mind, Chris, is we used to put all of that weight on the shoulders of the manager, whether she or he had those skills to be able to say, hey, David, go a little bit more slowly, be a little bit more accurate in what you're doing. Or, hey, you know, we really need to get this thing done, speed up. Error's okay. We'll fix it later. Having that coaching built into a model and then being able to give that model to the right person to be able to then coach through these attributes gives them the ability to not to have to rely on understanding this intuitively, because a lot of people don't. And we know that. We've worked with a lot of managers who just don't get it and or who react negatively to being able to have to provide these things. Why don't you know? How is it that you don't know how to do this? Well, you're my boss. You're supposed to tell me if I'm doing something well or not. Help me. And I think the models that you're talking about, they provide that, and they provide the intuition that we may not have.
Yes.
And especially in a complex work environment.
The first time I started doing this was with a company, international company in Latin America, and we looked at 40 sales representatives. So after we built their scorecard and we understood they had 12 different KPIs, key performance indicators, we had a model for each one of those. I think our average, we were explaining about 97% of the variability across those 12. Then we built a scorecard for each one of the 40 sales reps and then an action plan for each one. And when we summed up one of the metrics, just one of the metrics, the annual increase in dollars was $138 million. So imagine now you've got a group of managers and you can come in and say, hey, we'll roll out these action plans. Just have regular weekly meetings with your sales reps. Go back and see, try to figure out which activities in the sales cycle are most likely to be related to this behavioral trait, which we know for Sally, if she reduces this, for John, that's a strength for him. For Larry's got a slightly increase.
Right.
Now you've got a real actionable goal-related plan that's dollarized. It's monetized now. It gives meaning.
Right, which is what the businesses have been screaming at HR for. Give me a way of monetizing the work you do. Help me understand what the impact of HR is. And what you've just done is you've laid it out at their fingertips and say, these are behavioral change that HR can help the managers make, especially in these situations, whether it's sales, whether it's customer support or service, whether it's collections, the credit and collections group. If you're changing their behaviors and you're giving them those skills, or at least coaching them through those skills,
yes,
it can actually cause real dollar
but it
impact.
changes people's lives. So a quick example, going back to the university study we just did, and the professor, Alejandro Fernandez, just asked me next semester to do it at the graduate level. So we got really good feedback, which is wonderful. But there was one student, and I did a scorecard for the student once we had the model built, predicting the academic performance. And this student was getting a D+. So I found one behavioral trait out of 6 that if the student would slightly increase by only 1 unit, which is doable, we know what percentage of the population that is, and that it's reasonable. Sure. And the trait was called take charge, to exercise a little more leadership and assertiveness. The grade would go from D+ to A-.
Wow.
Single behavioral trait.
That's insane.
So imagine the empowerment
really cool.
of the professor now meeting with each student and helping them overcome and encouraging them and saying, there's a great path here to you being successful. Let's work together. Yeah.
And it would be amazing if you were able to take that and be able to provide that as feedback to every student, to be able to give them that kind of assessment. And, they take standardized tests all the time. What could we do to our not only high school kids, but the elementary kids, to be able to coach them on what traits would make them much more successful, not only in the elementary school or grade schools or the high schools, what would make them more successful in life? And so that just brings that up. I know we can't solve that today. That's probably another conversation for another podcast.
Sure.
But wow,
sure.
that is
imagine,
real impact.
I did have a project years ago with a very large school district in Florida, Broward County Public Schools. They gave us 2 years of academic performance of the students in elementary school, middle school, and high school. So we had a point system, and these were points related to gains in math and English. So what we did is we built models for people that wanted to come into the teaching profession and work in that school district. And these were the type of personalities of people coming in that we had some evidence for them. They'd be able to promote learning gains in students. So it's a beautiful thing, because it's different to teach at the high school level as it is in elementary, of course, just intuitively we know that. But then to be able to say, here are the traits that we know are important for your success in being a high school teacher, as opposed to a middle school or elementary school teacher.
Wow. Just wow. Thank you, Chris. I think we all learned a lot. And in summary, we talked about basically 3 things. We talked about using predictive models and what is PMML. We talked about how to get really interesting insight out of assessments. And then we talked about actually being able to use those assessments in coaching and being able to find real ways of being able to impact businesses and schools, but businesses. And it's really fascinating. Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up?
We respect people's uniqueness, and to find those roles for which they fit like a glove is a wonderful goal. And that's what the psychometric industry has been doing for about 100 years. Now, when you add to that, there's a Maya principle. You combine the most advanced with that which is basically, Maya means that it's most acceptable, right? So the most acceptable is what we all know. And that's the assessment industry. Now you combine that with what we don't know, we're kind of afraid of. We're afraid of this artificial intelligence, which is just automated reasoning, is all that it is. You combine those two together, and you have a wonderful applications to humanize our interactions, to make them more powerful and accurate, transparent, and you help both the company, the organization, and the employee, the member. So that's the beautiful thing. And people with slight behavioral changes can go from being unsuccessful to wildly successful. And I've seen this over 20 years. And before that, as a recruiter also. So I just think that people are resilient. If you support them and find out where their unique talents are best used in the company, then you'll just have marvelous results.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. For those who want to follow Chris, we're going to have the links to Kunze Analytics on the podcast in the notes. You can also find him on LinkedIn. Chris, thank you very much. As I said, most technical, but also probably more fascinating
You're welcome.
podcast
Thank
we've
you,
had
Dave.
on HR Data Labs. Thank you. And hopefully we'll have another one of these very soon. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate your support. If you'd like, please follow us and subscribe to us. And if you don't mind, please forward the podcast to one of your friends who might find this interesting as well. And thank you very much. And please stay safe.
That was HR Data Labs. Please visit turetskyconsulting.com/podcast to review the show, add comments about this episode, or add new ideas about upcoming shows you'd like to hear. Feel free to be creative, but please be nice. Thank you for joining us this week on the HR Data Labs podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.